Hi everyone. I hope you all are doing well and I'm audible, everyone. Yeah. Okay, great. Yeah. So welcome to today's Taiwan IGF 2025 workshop on traversing the blurry landscape of content moderation, protecting online speech in the age of mis-disinformation. I'm Pranay Dikshit, volunteer counsel at SFLC.in, and I'll be the moderator for this session. I'm grateful to the attendees, panelists who have joined us here today. I would also like to express my gratitude to the Secretariat for organizing this year's edition of Taiwan IGF and having this session be a part of the forum's agenda. Now, 2024 was a landmark year for democracy as people in 72 countries went to the polls around the world. What also transpired in the last few years is an increase in misinformation and social media platforms gradually shifting how they tackle this issue. This has ranged from dissolving partnerships with independent fact checking organizations to organizational restructuring of teams and restructuring of policies that has been dedicated towards identifying such content and verifying the veracity of information disseminated online. To unpack the various nuances of this topic, I have the pleasure to introduce the panel for today's session. Firstly, we are joined by Ms. Kritika Goel. She is the editorial and strategic lead at Asian Dispatch. She is an award winning fact checker, editor, and writer who has had the opportunity to work with several leading news organizations in India. In a career spanning almost a decade, Kritika has worn several hats. She has started off as a television journalist but soon moved to explore the realms of digital media. Her work has focused on platform accountability, upholding information integrity, building trust and safety, and countering online misinformation and disinformation related to political campaigns, health, finance, and technology. Kritika has helped operationalize and scale up two international fact checking network certified fact checking newsrooms. She has worked on promoting media and digital literacy among women, students, and young adults in India. Next up, we have with us Syed Mohammad Haroon, volunteer legal counsel at SFLC.in. Haroon is a legal researcher and public interest lawyer working at the intersection of technology, constitutional rights, and public policy. His work at SFLC.in involves strategic litigation, legal research, and advocacy on digital rights. He focuses on issues such as internet shutdowns, online surveillance, platform regulation, data protection, and the rights of vulnerable groups in digital spaces. Haroon has been actively engaged in regional and global internet governance processes. He has contributed to and supported session proposals at the Internet Governance Forum, the Asia Pacific Regional Internet Governance Forum, and the Digital Rights and Inclusion Forum held in Lusaka, Zambia. Through his work, he collaborates with civil society organizations and policy networks across the Asia Pacific region to promote rights respecting digital policy frameworks and safeguards fundamental freedoms online. We were also going to have Ms. Uttara Ganesh, Head of Public Policy at Snap Inc. However, due to last minute exigencies, she won't be able to join us today. Now, I'd like to hand over to our speakers for this session for their opening remarks. Kritika, if we could begin with you first.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Pranay. It's honestly wonderful to be here, and this is a very, very important conversation to have. I think, as you've already mentioned, 2024 was a year of elections, and that is something all of us in our newsrooms were discussing and talking about all of 20 in the all of 2024. One thing that I really want to focus on. Yes, while we're talking about online speech and content moderation, I think one thing which is very important to understand is the fact that with all of us having access to the internet, cheap internet, mobile phones being readily available, it's become very uh, easy for all of us to have an opinion and post that opinion online, because of which this problem of misinformation and disinformation has also been has really become like a bigger problem than it was before. When we talk about the news organizations, or when we talk about the news landscape, fact checking has always been a part of the news industry, but it's because of the way we are on social media and the way we're using the internet today, it's become a separate branch altogether. And I think there is no way in which I can emphasize enough on the fact that we require verified information about everything and anything that we're engaging with in today's time. It is not just about news, it's also fact checking or misinformation is not limited to news personnel. It's not just about journalists and media professionals. It's also for people who are online and are engaging with any kind of information. So I think the only thing that I want to say, and I hand it back to you after that, is that when we're talking about content moderation, we're talking about online speech, there is something that really needs to be kept in mind, and that is that while it's absolutely important to uphold freedom of speech and expression, and it's absolutely important to ensure that we all have the right to say what we have to say, but at the same time it's equally important to make sure what we are saying is verified, what we're sharing is verified. And yeah, we just, like, take out those 2 minutes to make sure that information that we're sharing with others is the right information, because that's really critical in today's time. So I think I'll pause there and I'll hand it
No, definitely. Thank you for that, Kritika. And that balancing act between preventing misinformation and disinformation online and also protecting online speech is something that we will be exploring to uh, the discussion in today's session. Now, I'd like to invite Haroon for his opening remarks.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Renee. Uh, First of all, it's an honor to join this panel alongside such esteemed colleagues who have been working in this particular field for far longer time than I have. Uh, and maybe me being present here gives a fresh perspective to things as well. But yeah, I'll pick up where Kritika left off. And this is what she spoke about, it being a very fine line now and a very delicate balance that needs between content moderation and making sure that your free speech is protected. And I just say that the content moderation today is not as simple as it was before. It's not a checkbox exercise. There is a constant evolving and a high scale balancing act that it is. And while I mean, what we have seen with Meta this year and how a number of courts and a number of jurisdictions have been handling this, platforms worldwide are now grappling with the reality that measures are meant to be taken to prevent mis and disinformation. And it can sometimes risk stifling legitimate free speech and dissent. So now the whole idea becomes of making sure that these these mistakes, or I would say these overlap over legitimate free speech and dissent, is never encroached upon, while ensuring that the content moderation takes place. And we've seen a few steps which have been taken by the platforms as well as various states, and I think we'll discuss all of that moving forward. So I'll stop there, and once again, glad to be here.
No, thank you for that, Haroon. Right. So I think my first question would be, firstly, this is something that Haroon had mentioned with how Meta has shifted in terms of how it will be tackling with uh, content that qualifies as mis-disinformation. So how have partnerships between social media companies and independent fact-checking organizations helped in creating a more trustworthy information landscape? So that'll be my first question. And then what ramifications could the end of such partnerships have on people's access to information online? So, Kritika, what are your thoughts on this?
Uh, Again, thank you so much, Pranay, for that question. I think the first part of your question is about what do these partnerships entail, right? Like, what is the relationship between news organizations and these tech platforms? I think I do want to say one thing, and since you specifically mentioned Meta, I hope my memory serves me right, and I hope I'm getting the year right. But it was almost about 8-9 years ago when Meta started, 7-8 years ago actually, when Meta started its third party fact checking program, which is very popularly known as a 3PFC program. I think one of the good things about that program was nowhere was Meta censoring information. In no way we as independent fact checkers were working at the behest of the platform, or we were trying to censor information. The partnership was very clear. The partnership or the relationship between the platform and fact checking organizations was absolutely clear, where we were working with the platforms to make sure that we were able to help them clean up their platforms and take down misinformation from their platform. The role that fact checking organizations played over here was that we looked at the content, we fact checked it, and when we say fact check, mostly all the news organizations have a very clear methodology that we follow when we fact check. How we fact check, why are we fact checking certain things, all of that is extremely clear, especially for organizations that are IFCN certified. IFCN is the International Fact Checking Network. Now, coming back to the partnership between Meta and the fact checking organization. So essentially, in case, for example, as an independent fact checker, if I fact check something and I find out that, oh, that's misinformation or disinformation that's being shared on the platform, we'd put an overlay on that, which essentially means that as a reader, if tomorrow Pranay, for example, encounters that piece of information, he'll get that additional information that this piece of information has been fact checked by a third party fact checker, and they've marked it as misleading, false, or whatever rating we've given to that particular piece of information. Now, what that does is that as a user, it empowers me to take a certain decision. Now, whether I want to share it ahead, that's still my prerogative. Or I want to take a step back and make sure that, oh, whatever I'm sharing with my friends, my family, my circle is correct information. And I would then choose to maybe read that fact checking article or see what was wrong. So I think in that sense, this partnership was pretty clean and transparent. Sorry, not it was pretty transparent in the sense that we were fact checking misinformation for the platform. There was no censorship, and the reason also I'm clarifying all of this was because early in 2025, when Meta pulled the plug on the program, it did say that fact checkers were acting as arbiters of truth, and they are, sort of censoring information, which is quite surprising because there was nothing like censoring. You're essentially giving additional information. If at all anything, you're sort of empowering the readers to take that judgment. With other platforms other than Meta, Twitter, to my mind, as far as I remember, and I've worked in fact checking since 2018 almost, we've never had any structured or formal program with Twitter. And of course, then Twitter became X, so all hell broke loose, and then we've not really had any kind of a partnership where fact checkers were working very closely with the platforms. But I do want to say one thing, that while there are these partnerships and there are these programs, one thing I have really felt very strongly about in the years that I have spent in the fact checking space is that there needs to be transparency in whatever you do, whether you work with the platforms, whether you work with anybody else, because at the end of the day, the users need to know what is happening and how is that process being followed. If there is lack of transparency, there are going to be too many questions, and I felt that that is exactly what happened with the program that Meta was running as well. It's still running in the rest of the world. US is the only country where they've basically pulled the plug on the program as of now. So I think there needs to be transparency so that the end user also understands what platforms are doing, or what news organizations or fact checking organizations are doing. So I think those are basically that's something that I want to say about the partnership that news organizations have with platforms. To your second question about the consequences, I think it is very difficult to comment on it in the sense that I don't know how do I say what is the tangible impact of it. But of course, as somebody who was interacting with audiences and viewers as well, I do see that there were people, I do see that there were readers who'd come back to us and tell us that, you know, they read a particular fact check that we had written, or that a particular piece of misinformation that they had shared with us for us to verify, and that helped them in a certain way. Now, what is the impact of misinformation and disinformation? I think I can keep going on and on about that, but I wouldn't want to do that. But the only thing I want to say is that the consequence is that people need to have access to verified and accurate information. Unfortunately, in today's time, a word that became extremely popular during the pandemic, which was infodemic, is very real. There is too much of information. You need to make sense of that information, because unfortunately, not everything that is out there is the right information. A lot of it sometimes needs to be contextualized. A lot of it needs to be verified. A lot of it needs to be told in a way so that it is, you know, people are able to make sense of that information. So I think the only thing, the point over here is to also is the fact that there needs to be transparency in any kind of a relationship that you forge between, whether it's fact checkers or news organizations or platforms. And the second thing is the tangible impact it is likely to have on your audiences. And here we're talking about real people, because there are, like, I don't want to throw numbers because I don't remember the numbers off the top of my head right now. But of course, we know there are millions of people who are using these platforms on a daily basis.
Right. And I think that your response to this question is perfect segue into what I was going to ask you about next, which is now we have seen a shift towards, at least with respect to a couple of prominent social media platforms, they've seen a shift towards a crowdsourced uh, system of fact checking. So how do you think this form of a system will, is this going to improve access to truthful information, verified information online? And then what are the anticipated trade-offs here?
Right. Pranay, I think honestly, I have never seen it as this or that. I think it's a combination of both, which can work really well together when we talk about verifying information, or rather, when we talk about content moderation. I think one major drawback of a crowdsourced system, or what we popularly call as community notes, is that the system is really rigged, in the sense that there are users, people like you and I can also sign up for that community note system, and we can start labeling posts. But there are a couple of things, and that's something that we also documented. Previously, when I was working with Logically Facts, my colleague and I, we had worked on a story after the 2024 elections in India were over, and we looked at how successful those community notes were. And I think a couple of things that we found out and that really stood out for us were, number one, that it takes a lot of time for these community notes to pop up underneath a tweet or underneath a post. So it's possible that you might have seen it today, but the community note is only going to appear 48 hours later or 72 hours later. So in my opinion, it's too little and it's too late, because it is not necessary that as a reader, as a user, I will come back to that post and I will see what a particular community note is saying. I have consumed that information and I have probably believed in that information and I have moved on with that round piece of information. So one major drawback, according to me, of community notes is that it takes a lot of time for these notes to appear. Number two, as I said, the system itself is slightly rigged, in the sense that it allows for people to come together to vote on a certain thing and then the note appears. But now it's possible that I internally can rig it, right? Like, I have 10 like-minded people, and of course, 10 is a very small number that I'm just using for the purpose of illustration over here, that I have 10 more people whom I get to vote for a certain post or the community note that I've added. And that note is going to, you know, if it gets the popular vote, it is likely to appear on the platform. It's not necessary that it is the right information, right? So that is also a very big challenge, that it's not necessary that your community note is the verified information that is sort of supplementing the information that is available in the post. As opposed to this, fact checking is a very streamlined process. As I said, most of the fact checking organizations across the world, they follow a certain methodology, and that methodology is very clearly listed on their website, especially the ones which are IFCN certified. Why? I'm going to tie it back to what I said earlier. It's very important from a transparency point of view. As a reader, you should be able to understand, why am I fact checking a certain political party or a politician, or how am I choosing that these are the ones I'm going to fact check. So all of that is very clearly laid in, like, all that process is very clearly laid for fact checking organizations. What we do, how we do, even in terms of the sources we use, we try and always go back to the primary source. We try and always ensure that we're able to give tangible evidence to the reader. As I said, as opposed to the community notes, where you don't have that kind of clarity, you don't have that kind of transparency, and it's also possible to rig the process. However, when you put the two together, where you do have the benefit of the community, because over the last 5-7 years, I've always heard one major criticism for fact checking, which is that by the time you guys get to fact checking and you put out a story, the rumors spread across the world. That popular saying that lies traveled halfway around the world while truth's busy putting its pants on. So I know that's true, because it's a time consuming process to verify something, to gather facts, to put it together. And for the lack of a better word, people do find these long stories boring, because there's no fun element sometimes in there. It's at the end of the day a very heavy research oriented article, where you're talking about why why some things are right, why some things aren't right, etc., etc. So long story short, the only thing I want to say, I feel that the two of these together, the two um, models of community notes and fact checking, I feel they can really work together, because when you have the backing of a community or a huge user base who can also help you verify, but at the end of the day, there is somebody who's moderating and ensuring that the community note that's going out is verified information, that could really work well. But I don't see this as a either or situation. I don't think it could be one. In fact, sorry, I know I've spoken for too long. I just want to very quickly add one tiny thing, which is, actually, community notes were launched as Birdwatch in the US, when it was still Twitter, when the platform was still called Twitter. I sorry don't remember the year, but this was, I think, during the pandemic, if I'm not mistaken. That's when it was launched. So basically, that's where it took off from, and since then we've been talking about community notes and adding that extra piece of information to the posts and also. Yeah.
Right. And just a small follow-up question. So is it possible, like one of the possible drawbacks of a community notes-based system can be that it can sort of reinforce the echo chambers that it's actually trying to tackle? Yeah.
In my
Yeah.
opinion, yes. In my opinion, absolutely. It certainly can. And that is something we did notice during, after actually the 2024 elections, as I mentioned, that was something that we had worked on. And we wanted to, the whole objective what was to see how successful these community notes are. And it is absolutely possible for a person to rig it completely. And it's absolutely possible for, community nodes to also create echo chambers, and that is exactly what we are up against and fighting against, right? That you don't want echo chambers to be formed. You want information to be accurate, and you don't have to believe me because I am saying it. You believe me because I'm providing you with tangible evidence, because I am giving you the sources for that. You don't have to believe me. But when it comes to community notes, yes, there are links also. I do want to clarify that when you talk about community notes, you do have to provide source. But whether that source itself is going to be primary source or secondary source, that's what I'm saying. There's lack of transparency, in the sense that users might believe it, saying, oh yeah, of course, see, they've added a link to an article, or they've added something. But now, whether that article itself is accurate or not, you don't know. So there are lots of questions, and that's why I say that the two models together could really work well. In my opinion, I don't see it as a either or situation.
Right. No, thank you. Thank you for that, Kritika. And now I'd like to sort of come to the next topic, which is free speech and how protecting free speech and expression online and preventing mis-disinformation are often viewed in opposition to each other. Um, so my this question is particularly I'll invite Haroon to give a response to this question, which is how do you think this conflict manifests itself in people's interactions on social media platforms?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And yeah, I mean, I think the things that Kritika have spoken about up until now about the whole community notes as well as fact checking units, how they play a part and how we are seeing that. And yeah, I completely agree with her that this cannot be an either or thing. It has to be uh, perhaps both working in a way that we can solve this problem very well. But coming to your question and how this whole situation manifests itself on on people's interactions on social media. So now, as already been stated in the chat, that we have been social media serves as a vital public place and accesses gives access to sharing ideas, news, opinions, whatnot. And this platform becomes even more important when there is something important happening. It could be an election, it could be any kind of conflict, or even a natural disaster. So the after effect of people sharing their ideas, news, or opinion that we see on these platforms rises substantially when it comes to especially these situations. So the normal usage is obviously there, and we're going to talk about both and how they're working in this whole environment. Now, the one thing that makes these platform so accessible and and the people are so comfortable sharing their ideas is the openness of these platforms. So then this openness makes them susceptible to a rapid spread of misinformation or disinformation, which we have seen a number of times previously. I mean, if I give you the example in Indian elections during the recent attacks in the Jammu and Kashmir region, previously over the Indian elections, and globally, if you're talking about, since we are speaking at TWIGF, what happened during the Taiwan's presidential election. There were a number of external actors that were linked to either Taiwan state or towards the incumbent president at the time. So that we have seen that all of these situations create a number of opportunities for anyone who uses this. And I'd just like to quote one of my colleague. I think he is also quoting someone by saying this, that technology is neither bad or good. It's not even neutral. It all depends on who's using that. So that becomes a problem. And as Kritika said, that's a problem with even the community nodes because that can be rigged. While on the other hand, fact checking units are very well organized, they are certified, they have to follow some kind of a guidelines in order to ensure that whatever they're putting out becomes accurate. Although that comes with the problem of it being a bit delayed. Now, coming to this perception of distrust and how this manifests as itself in people's interaction on social media platforms, these whole situation of misinformation, disinformation, and the debunking process being either slow or rigged uh, can cause a lot of mistrust with the platform itself. So, for instance, if we have a platform that does no content moderation, then the platform can become a place where your your opinions can cause more trouble, even though it's giving you outrightly 100% free speech, then it can cause you any good. Then comes the problem of having some moderation. However, when that time comes, a person whose opinion might be legitimate, or one who feels that their opinion was legitimate, their content gets moderated. If it either it could be flagged or be taken down or being blocked from a region. That, if it starts happening over a platform quite frequently, it also leads to a distrust in that particular platform, or it could cause an accusation of bias or polarization, creating polarization among the communities. So these are the problem that comes. Now, up until now, speaking from a legal standpoint, almost in every jurisdiction that there is a social media intermediary that is a platform, they have to abide by a few rules. In India, we have the safe harbor rules. We have similar rules in other every other nation where the social media intermediaries have to abide by the given guidelines and ensure that they are doing all they can to make sure not only that their platform is free and open, but also that it is not creating or it is not catalyzing any problem. But then it becomes a problem even for the platform and the state to regulate, because technology is developing by the hour, and I think the platform might be able to keep up with it. The legislations will not. So that keeps causing a problem. So if, again, going back to an Indian example, we have had a number of laws in our Information Technology Act. We have had Section 69A that talks about blocking of power. And then we had previously Section 66A that was for content moderation. The Section 66A was struck down by the court, but now that we see we have because we are speaking on the international platform, we have a state called Karnataka, and where we had a fact checking unit. So what happened there was essentially the revival of Section 66A that talked about content moderation. And that had to be worked upon by even the platforms and a number of other independent journalists and people who are using these platforms as their livelihood. So it becomes a tussle, and this tussle manifests itself among. So as we are influenced by fake news, we are also influenced by what's going on with the platform. So if a platform is under a lot of trouble for its content moderation, that will create a bias against that platform in our heads, in the public side, and that will replicate further. So on one instance, if I can give Twitter's example, on one instance where we have seen Twitter being very uh, harsh on censorship, that they had been previously doing a lot of censorship and content moderation in one jurisdiction, while on the other hand in India they are fighting cases before various high courts for against content moderation, that we want to be free. So that becomes a whole situation on how do you understand a platform and how do you understand how a platform has to function. So the accountability part is also quite challenging in this. And I know this is going everywhere, so I'll just sum it up by just saying that there are a lot of cultural, political, and linguistic diversity that complicates the enforcement of content policies and the definitions of misinformation or harm. So the first things that have to be done for better solving of such issues is to have, first of all, defining what counts as a misinformation or something else for you for a particular jurisdiction, and then working on that. And because of this whole situation with the multiple platforms with respect to their behavior in a particular jurisdiction and how they have been moderating content, it reflects the user's interactions. It reflects on the user interaction And the core challenge now that becomes is a balancing the protection of free expression with the need to prevent harm. So the first priority must always be free expression. The one thing that really comes with it is the need to prevent harm, and that prevention of harm cannot be a standalone thing. It has to be an evolving thing. So for that, perhaps there could be transparency, clear guidelines, inclusive moderation approaches that can help ease this conflict and build trust. So for that, I think I'll just conclude by saying that one of the problem that comes with fact-checking units, if one understands fact-checking unit, they can say, okay, they have to abide by regulations and they are more or less unbiased. But we have a few fact-checking units in India as well who are every now and then said that they are biased towards a particular community or whatsoever. So when we mix the two approaches of community notes as well as fact-checking units, we can see that this bias might also decrease, and that will as a result build more trust over a platform and give that openness or sense of openness that the public once had on a platform. So yeah, I think I'll stop with that and give it back to you.
Right. No, for sure. And I think, Haroon, you've wonderfully highlighted what the challenges are with having a regulation in place. And my next question was going to be this, which is how can social media regulation facilitate a healthier online space in a manner in which the freedom of speech and expression is not unduly curbed in an attempt to prevent the dissemination of mis and disinformation. You did talk about the Karnataka bill, and one of the key challenges is, I believe, defining what is mis-disinformation, because that's the starting point, right? And that definition in and of itself, it needs to be carefully thought out. So yeah, how do you think um, platform regulation and uh, uh, safe harbor, how does this sort of evolve in um, the landscape that we are today?
Yeah, I bet. So yeah, uh, first and foremost, we need a defined terminology of things. Although I do understand that the rate technology is advancing, you cannot have a very solidified definition, but it should also not be as broad and vague as we have been seeing lately, especially in context of India. So just to give you an example, uh, every other thing, so we have the fundamental rights and there are reasonable restrictions with the fundamental rights, and every other thing that comes with content moderation or any kind of moderation for that matter has this scope of reasonable restrictions into it. So anything that relates to national security, friendly relations with state, with the trade and finances or public order or whatsoever can be brought into the perspective of reasonable restrictions, and your content, even though as per you it might be very legitimate, very factful, there are the opinions that you have written are 100% accurate as per you, it might still fall under that category and your content might be removed. uh, in the previous iterations of some of our bills that we have seen with the Digital Personal Data Protection Act, with what we have seen with the Information Technology Intermediary Guidelines and Digital Media Ethics Code, we have seen that the previous iterations of all these acts and bills used to have some definitions which were then taken up. So, the meaning of hurt or sensitive personal information, or when it comes to misinformation, disinformation, the definitions currently, uh, speaking in speaking in South Asia's terms, is quite broad. So the regulations must first clearly define harmful content, to avoid vague rules that risk these censoring a legitimate species. So that has to be the first step. The second step, I think, is transparency about content moderation policies. So this is actually a big problem right now in India with content moderation, for which our organization SFLC.in, uh, platforms such as Twitter and a number of other independent journalists and organizations are working on this. So we have a led out content moderation rule. I mean, we have that rule for blocking of content. But whatever happens in that blocking of content, we have just added one proviso clause that anything that deals with your blocking of content has to be confidential. So even though on paper it might seem that we have some kind of transparency, we have given out step-by-step procedure on how a content blocking has to take place, how many steps of notices have to be given, what are the people who are going to be judged of whether the content has to be taken down or not. Even though all these details are given, the problem still is there with that one specific clause that makes everything confidential. So the regulations must not only be transparent but seen as transparent. It should be publicly visible as transparent regulations about content moderations and the whole decision making process. Now, the other thing is accessible appeals and timely review mechanisms so that we can ensure fairness and allow users to contest their removals. This is also something that is currently under challenge in India at the moment. But the problem with that and with a number of other jurisdictions is that even though there is a grievance appellate community, even though there is a grievance redressal officer, there are gaps. There is a lack of response from what we have been seeing over the past few months, where we have been studying this whole process of content moderation, content takedowns on the platform itself, not going to the court. So that even though I would say the manpower is there, or the particular person to approach is given, the problem is with the timely response of things. And for the appeal mechanism to understand the cultural reference you are insinuating, uh, or your particular case in hand, because the global south comes from a very diverse place, and it becomes highly important for the content moderators and the platform to understand the political and cultural context of things. The fourth thing has to be an independent oversight that can check against arbitrary or biased content restrictions that usually come from the state, wherein I think the fact checking units can also broaden the scope of their work and take this ahead as well, because this is something that falls squarely between on their work and can be taken forward. So this is the problem. I think these are some things that have to be taken in consideration when it comes to regulation, and then there are a few things that have to be taken in consideration to understand the point. So for that, as I have said, that uh, the enforcement across languages, regions, to protect not only the minority languages, culture, but to understand in a context where that was spoken. So we had previously come across a case where a particular minority group was being called a name which was, I mean, so for example, we have this term called pancherwalas. So these are people who would fix your tire. And for anyone who does not come from this particular culture, it's a person who fixes your tire, but in a cultural reference, that can be a derogatory term to a particular community. So the people who are handling content moderation, who are handling these appeals and the platforms have to take into account that they are doing enough to include these cultural references, or at least understand these cultural references. And obviously, that would require investment in multilingual content moderation and local expertise which becomes essential for fairness in the whole content moderation and openness. And then the problem which comes from the people has to go back to the people. So if there is fake news, if there is content being misled or is presented as false, then the final step has to be digital literacy for the end users as well. Because in this my personal opinion, that the problem can be solved with digital literacy. So I have been to a few sessions that Kritika had conducted previously at Logically Facts. And if this can be replicated on a number of instances, then the people themselves understand that, okay, I'm looking at a picture, but that looking at a picture should automatically arise 5-6 questions in my head. Whether this is accurate, when was this taken, whether this falls squarely to the context that was given there. And I think with a combination of all of this, we can foster an ecosystem where free speech flourishes alongside safe and reliable information. I think I've spoken for way too long. I just stop.
Right. No, thank you for that, Haroon. And yeah, and I think one of the points that you highlighted regarding digital literacy is something that I'd also like to sort of discuss. But before we get to that, Kritika, how do you view social media regulation, particularly the kind that has sort of dealt with this issue in the recent past? I remember that we had a capacity building workshop last year on mis-disinformation, and one of the things that you had mentioned was that often regulations are or have been and not have been reactionary, not anticipatory. So yeah, would like to bring in your perspective here as well.
I think, unfortunately, that's where I still stand. Regulations, even today, are unfortunately not preventive. Sorry, they are, you know, they don't help you prevent something, right? So they're not preventive. They are mostly reactionary. In response to something, we say this is how. I remember back in 2023, I think this is in October, when a deepfake video of one of the Indian actors had gone viral. It showed her in a bodysuit. And I remember the first advisory that had come out from the government also said that how people should go and file a report, you should file a complaint at a cyber cell, etc., etc., which is all fair. I'm not saying anything against it, but I'm just saying that this is not preventive, right? It is not going to stop something from happening. You're saying what is the action one should take after it has happened. So unfortunately, I still stand where I stood last year, where I said that regulations are still, they need to be preventive, they can't just be reactive. One thing I wanted to mention, when Haroon was talking about content moderation and he was talking about cultural and linguistic specifications, especially in a country as diverse as India, I think, how platforms are also moving towards automation when it comes to content moderation. I also see that as a huge challenge, because unfortunately, even today, we don't have, automation has not reached that level where it can understand each and every cultural where it can understand each and every cultural context, it can understand local nuances, it can understand linguistic nuances. So that still continues to be a challenge, I feel, in India. Again, there are simple words, like one example that Haroon gave. That word in itself is not a derogatory word, but when you use it for a certain community, that's when it becomes like a slur or it becomes a derogatory word. There are several other such words, and we've had several other, we've had multiple conversations over the years where we're talking about drawing up a list of all the problematic words which are used in a certain content, which should be blacklisted by platforms for automation, for content moderation. But I don't see that happening, because I think it's always the context, and that's also something that I spoke about earlier, that information in itself is not always about right or wrong. It's also about a lot of contextualization that happens around it, right? So whether you're using that word, I'm sorry for using it again, but for using pancharwala or rice bags that we use for another minority community in India, that's also a derogatory word that's used usually as a slur as well. So it all depends on the context in which it is being used. And yeah, I do want to mention one very quick thing. It's not exactly a segue, but it is still linked to the problem of misinformation and disinformation. Online scams, financial scams, that's become such a huge thing in today's time. I don't even want to get into the numbers, because the numbers are mind boggling. If I talk only about India, the amount of money we've lost globally, the figures are staggering. So I'm not even going to quote those numbers because I'm sure all of us over here know about it. But the only thing that I want to say is that I think that's where we are struggling even today. These online scams which happen through platforms, usually, yes, they don't always happen on open platforms. They also happen on closed platforms like WhatsApp. But unfortunately, there also the regulation is very fragmented, in the sense that while fraudsters or scammers have become global, they will sit in Cambodia or Laos and scam a person sitting in India. But our laws, our regulations are very fragmented. Our regulations are again very, very reactionary. They are not preventive. There's lack of cooperation, there's lack of coordination, there's lack of collaboration. So that is something I really focus on through my work as well, that there needs to be collaboration. We don't always have to look at reinventing the wheel. We don't always have to look for solutions from the scratch. Sometimes there are existing solutions. You only have to uh, mold them according to your needs. So that is where your collaboration and cooperation comes into the picture. So sorry, I just wanted to really mention that, because I think when we're talking about all sorts of information, even online scams, that's a kind of misinformation, or a disinformation rather, campaign which is really widespread in today's time, and it's relevant for all of us, not just people in India but across the world.
Right. And for sure, I think one of the things that even I've realized working in this space is that these issues, I mean, mis-disinformation, this has existed. It does not come into the picture now. In 2010s, it's existed for a while. It's just that with social media platforms, the virality of content has increased, which also increases the virality of mis-disinformation. So from the perspective of, and we talked about how regulation has responded to this issue, and the consequences that have transpired. What are the alternative strategies do you think would be effective in combating this crisis and mitigating the harms that are caused by this form of content? First, I'd like to come to you, Kritika, then Haroon for his remarks on this question.
So I think a couple of things that Haroon had mentioned, I might sound repetitive, but I think those are very, very important points to really reiterate. One is literacy. And when I say literacy, I do not mean to put the burden or the onus on the users. It is only to make sure that we are able to empower them, so that they also know that, I don't expect, and this is something that I've also learned through all the literacy workshops that I've conducted, where people say that we don't always have the time to sit down and verify, and I completely understand the paucity of time. So that's why I say that it's more about empowerment. It's about critically evaluating information and ensuring that you don't share that information ahead. Like, I think you and ran a campaign which said pause, and I think it's really effective. We're not talking about sitting down and verifying and going through data sets and documents and tell us what the reality is. No, but even if you pause and you don't share it ahead, that's going to be very, very useful. So to my mind, literacy, digital literacy, media literacy, financial literacy, all of this is absolutely critical in today's time where all of us are online. So just to make sure that we're able to protect ourselves, we're able to protect the people around us, it's important to just know that everything that you come across online is not verified information. So even if you just pause and take a step back and decide not to share it ahead, that's really going to be helpful. Other thing that I would mention is something that I said just now: collaboration, cooperation, and coordination between governments, between newsrooms, between platforms. That's essential. Transparency is really the key. Yes, you have policies. Yes, there are regulations. Yes, you have all of that. But the end user doesn't know anything about it. And yes, it does concern the end user. So the end user needs to know what these policies and how these policies are going to help them, right? So I feel that when we're talking about even cooperation and collaboration, it should not be restricted to building solutions or looking for something, I mean, of course you look for solutions and build solutions, but you also take on the small things of empowering your end users. Again, I'm going to tie it back to literacy, because when you work with the governments, you can really conduct large scale literacy programs and initiatives that can be done through your grassroots levels, that can be done through schools, so that you start teaching people early. And the thing that I mentioned about transparency, and I think this is literally the third time I'm talking about transparency, but I think that's really critical. And I do remember Haroon also mentioned and spoke about that, because if there is lack of transparency, for example, I'll give an example of fact checking. If people don't understand what is it that I'm fact checking and why am I fact checking, there is no transparency about that, they can easily question my methodology, they can easily question whether there is bias in what we are doing or not. How would you know, and how can you be sure about the fact that what I am doing is right or wrong? I think the key is transparency. You're being transparent about what you're picking up. Like, for example, we used to follow a methodology, or we used to follow these a checklist of sorts while picking up something to verify that, whether it's likely to have an impact on people, what is the level of harm, what's the level of virality a particular piece of information has. So because you don't also want to pick up and fact check something which is not viral, because that's likely to do more harm than it's likely to do good. So that's why I talk about transparency. So I think for me, those three things really are important, which is collaboration, literacy, and transparency when it comes to any kind of regulation, whether it's information or anything, essentially.
Right. No, thank you for that, Kritika. And Haroon, you've had a great amount of experience with digital security training. So, what do you think are the possible strategies that are worth exploring to combat this crisis?
Uh, I'd skip myself from saying transparency again because that has already been covered. And apart from legal frameworks, what Kritika has mentioned falls squarely on the long-term strategies that would be followed. I do not have much to add. I would just say that for the time being, the reliance on AI, as you have also mentioned, has to be. I mean, there's not no harm against moderation by AI. Just that has to be not left on its own judgment. There has to be an human oversight for the time being, at least, while your data sets are 100% accurate, or accurate to a level that you can understand context from it. Obviously, speaking all of this seems very easy, but this is all putting a lot of burden on the platform itself, because the content moderation, ensuring your platform is open and free while ensuring that it's not doing anything bad, all of that lies on the platform. So I think along with whatever's been mentioned up until now about literacy and developing transparent tools, community support, and partnerships and collaborations. As Kritika mentioned, the only few things that has to be done on this front is first to have a human aspect to the moderation still. The other thing that can be done is to making the policy making more inclusive. That is inviting collaboration on the policy itself. So hopefully, sorry, solving the problem which Kritika you had mentioned an year ago when we had a short meeting, that this is all reactionary, and hopefully if the policy making is made inclusive, then it can come from the platforms, the civil society organizations, individual who are who are people who are working on this, who are the persons who are facing these issues on a daily basis. So I think that can lead to a faster solving of problems. I think that's it from my side.
Right, right. No, thank you. And I think this will be critical
Uh,
on
I
a
think
long.
Kritika has
Yeah.
something to add.
Oh, sorry. Yes.
Very, very
Great.
sorry for
No
interrupting
issues, please.
your. I just wanted to add one very quick thing to what Haroon just said about platforms and not putting too much of pressure on them as well. I completely understand that. Sometimes I think about it, and this is completely my opinion. I feel that it's also important for governments to sometimes incentivize platforms for doing the right thing instead of just penalizing them. I do feel that when it comes to fact checking, that itself became such a controversial thing that even platforms started distancing themselves from it, right? This is not at all to give a clean shit to the platforms and say that they are extremely naive and whatever they've done is right or wrong. But I'm just saying that maybe there also needs to be a bit of incentive for them in it, and they shouldn't be penalized directly or indirectly for dealing with it. So just wanted to add that.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, right, for sure. And I think collaboration across multiple stakeholders will, especially a collaboration that's geared towards enhancing digital literacy from the ground up and understanding how to make this entire process of content moderation um, um, uh, be inclusive of diversity across linguistic, regional context. That will be critical. Now, I'd like to invite um, questions from the audience. So please feel free to uh, put in questions in the chat or.
There's no people want to ask question.
Okay. All
Okay.
right. Great. No questions then?
No, no question.
Okay. All right. All right. Thank you.
Thank
Okay.
you.
All right. Then with this, we have reached the end of our workshop today. Thank you to our esteemed panelists who chose to take time out of their busy schedules and contribute to the discourse on this important topic. Finally, I thank the entire TWIGF team for their passion and hard work in helping to organize this event. See you all soon.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.